We're going to test the older 6900 XT AMD GPU coming in at $699 MSRP, and then the brand new 7900 XTX coming in at $999. Look, the older one has a bigger box. Does that mean that the value is better? We're going to, my mic is moving. Let me put this box down. We're going to try some games, see what happens. Let's step right in. I'm going to throw the 7900 XTX first, the reference edition, into my rig here. So for our first test, this is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. This benchmark is at 4K. Let's open up the settings here. Everything is on the extreme preset, but I've also turned off any upscaling. You can see no NVIDIA DLSS, no FSR. It's all off, no Intel, also all the upscalers. We're going to go back. We're going to run the benchmark, and we're going to see how well the 7900 XTX does. And then we're going to compare the 6900 XT. Well, spoiler alert, this GPU does really well. It even almost beat an RTX 4090. So the 6900 XT is going to have to provide a lot of performance for the value. All right, so here it's going. You can see the GPU is at 100% and a little bit over 2400 megahertz. Now, look at the temperature. 61C is the GPU core temperature. A lot of people were curious if the junction temperature of this guy, this is the reference edition, the exact model XTX that was having a huge problem recently with the AMD coolers. The junction temperature is at 75C. I just literally turned this on, so it's still pretty cool. GPU is installed normally in a horizontal position. My cooler, I've tested it already, does not have the issue that those other people did. So at least for those purposes, it's good. But you can see we're getting some pretty crazy FPS here at 4K. Like often it goes way above 100 FPS. Once in a while, it's going to dip down a little bit. My CPU is the powerful 7950X, the Ryzen 9. So we should not have any CPU bottleneck. And I mean, it's 4K, even though some of these GPUs have been bottlenecking 4K. Let's look at the results. 123 FPS average, 4K extreme. Very impressive showing from the 7900 XTX. You can see the settings here. This is a 4K 144 Hz monitor, and 3840 by 2160 is the resolution. Of course, the processor 7950X, and we are running on the newest driver available for the 7900 XTX, which is different than we're going to do for the 6900 XT because that has older drivers, some issues with that we'll talk about. As you can see, 24 gigabytes of VRAM, more than enough. We barely use 26% of that, so the 16 gigabyte of VRAM on the 6900 XT will not be an issue. Let's take a look at the low first here, the results. 58 FPS is the low. Low fifth is about 77 FPS. And of course, the important number is going to be the 123 FPS average. Very impressive. I'm very curious how the 6900 XT for cheaper will do compared to this newer GPU. So now here we are with the 6900 XT in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Quality extreme, no upscaling technology on. We're gonna run this benchmark and see how it does at 4K against the 7900 XTX. Remember, this guy here got around 123 frames per second average at 4K. Very impressive. This is a game that's like pretty friendly towards AMD GPUs, so I think this 6900 XT hopefully should do pretty good. It's getting around 69, 70 frames per second here. GPU usage 99%. The temperature for some reason is not showing up here on the MSI Afterburner. Sometimes it can be a little glitchy, but seems fine. And you do hear the coil whine just as much as the 7900 XTX. I actually have it running right behind me here. No, you can't quite see the GPU. Certainly is running there. So using some RAM there, way below 16 gigabytes. Not GPU VRAM, but the system RAM. The VRAM is around 9822, which is still well below the 16 gigabytes that the 6900 XT has. Of course, this guy here has 24 gigabytes of VRAM, so that's definitely pretty impressive. So let's see what's going on. Getting some pretty good frames. I mean, if I'm playing at 4K, easily you're getting over 60 frames per second average, which is definitely the minimum you want to be hitting. And it's not the 123 of the 7900 XTX, but you do get about 82 frames per second. Over here it says the GPU driver is below recommended. For some reason, I updated the driver on the 6900 XT. It is the newest one available from December, but it's just not showing up. It must be some type of glitch or something like that. So as we can see here, 82 frames per second, low first is 39 FPS, low fifth, 56 FPS. Of course, we're mostly GPU bound, so around 40 frames per second less than the RX 7900 XTX, but that's not too bad considering this is the last generation GPU, and technically this guy's supposed to be even above this one. I mean, that one is the 6900 XT, this is the XTX, and there is the 7900 XT, the regular one, that competes maybe more with this one. So overall, that's pretty impressive. I mean, 82 frames per second is not bad at all, especially considering you're paying hundreds of dollars cheaper for the 6900 XT. Still makes a very respectable showing. Now let's jump into another game that graphically I think is one of the most beautiful games released, Plague Tale Requiem. Of course, Plague Tale Innocence was the one that came out before. This game is unbelievably nice. It did have an update recently with ray traced shadows. We're going to play at 4K. Here are my settings now. As you can see, 3840 by 2160. The resolution optimizer, ultra quality, that's basically the best you can do. This is like the only option really. You can't turn it off. They have enabled this. It's kind of like FSR in a way. Everything is on ultra, as you can see, everything on ultra. Ray trace shadows right on the bottom, that's going to be on. So let's go. We're going to continue a saved game that I have, and keep an eye on the GPU sort of information on top. You can see 4K. We're going to be mostly GPU limited anyway, even though this is a 7950X Ryzen 9 CPU, so we wouldn't really have any trouble with bottlenecking anyway. So here we go. As you can see, really nice, awesome graphics, and we're kind of staying right under that 60 frames per second. This is the 7900 XTX. You can see it'll dip a little bit around 40, maybe a little bit lower. GPU going at 100%, around 23 to 2400 megahertz. Sometimes it's going to, go on up. Look at the temperature again, 63C. That's pretty good. Junction temperature about 82C. That's the one we were primarily concerned about the last few weeks. Remember those XTX reference coolers kind of like almost melting themselves going to 110. Mine is fine, however, no problem here. And as you can see, as we walk around, I mean, it's barely passing 40 frames per second. This is 4K Ultra, and it does have that ray traced shadows on. I think when you're playing a game like this, you want to turn on all of the eye candy. You don't need the fastest frame rate, even though 40 frames per second is a little bit on the lower side. But I've been playing this also on an RTX 4090, and of course it does get significantly higher than this, probably around, at least 60 frames per second, sometimes 70. That's without DLSS. We're talking about DLLA on the NVIDIA option. This is of course ultra quality. If we wanted to get around 60 FPS, let's see what we would have to do. So if we're getting this on the 7900 XTX, you can bet that we're definitely going to have to do something like this on the 6900 XTX. Let's make it a little more even. Let's go to balanced. This is going to be the upscaler. All right, I think balanced is probably it. Look at that, much smoother resolution. We're getting much closer to 60 frames per second now, often going over, a little bit under, but we gained a good 20 frames per second. Look at that, hit 63. GPU is still going at 100%. So overall, very playable on balanced. I can't really tell too much of a visual difference, to be honest. If you really look, the quality, of course, is going to be perhaps a little bit sharper, a little bit more details, a little bit better graphical fidelity. But overall, I think this looks really, really good. And, in some scenes, we do go back down to 50 frames per second. But I don't think I would play this game on anything under balanced because, after all, it is a visual treat. And you do want to make sure that you have visuals really, really up there. Let me see if I turned off that ray tracing shadow. Let's see how big of an effect this is having. Obviously, ray tracing is not as good on AMD GPUs. Let's see, no ray trace shadows. Let's turn this back up to ultra quality where we were barely passing 40 frames per second. Wow, that makes a huge difference to the frame rate. Look at that. It just went above 70 frames per second. That's a big improvement. All I did was turn off ray trace shadows, and you're getting significantly better performance on ultra quality. I think the trade-off, probably better to turn off ray trace shadows. It's just going to make the shadows look a little bit better. I'd probably rather play on ultra quality rather than balanced, to be honest. And you're still getting 60 frames per second, even on some of these other scenes. So if you're going to be playing this game, probably turn off ray trace shadows. You're going to get much better performance on ultra quality. That's pretty good. We solved the little puzzle here. Very good. Let's go on to the next thing. So with the 6900 XT, Plague Tale Requiem, let's look a quick look at the settings. Everything on ultra, 4K once again. Ray trace shadows, I'm going to leave it on so you guys see the big penalty that we're going to get with that. So that's going to be the biggest thing about especially the older generation GPUs. I mean, this one, the 7900 XTX, can kind of do ray tracing a little bit better, but with the 6900 XT, it should be a pretty big performance penalty. I mean, it wasn't great on even the other GPU. The NVIDIA GPUs will handle this a lot better, but let's take a look here. As you can see, well under 30 frames per second as we move around. That's with ray trace shadows. And once again, this is going to be the 6900 XT. So not really very playable, not a good experience at all, even on a slow moving game such as this. So let's turn that ray tracing shadows off. I think that's probably going to make a nice difference. And remember, the resolution scalers on ultra quality. With the ray tracing shadows off, we do get a really nice bump in performance. It's still not 60 frames per second, but 43 frames is a lot better than like low 20s. We almost hit 50 frames per second here and there. And overall, this looks a lot better and it plays a lot smoother. But one thing that we want to go ahead and change, instead of ultra quality, it's ultra for the graphics, but for the resolution optimizer, let's throw this on balanced. I think this is really what is going to give us much better results. Take a look at that. 60 frames per second. I mean, this is very playable. It looks almost as good as it did on the 7900 XTX. Of course, no ray trace shadows, but this is on balanced and ultra on everything else. So plays very, very smoothly, looks really good. I'd be pretty happy playing with the 6900 XT with these type of graphical settings. Really not very bad at all. So the next game up for the 7900 XTX, let's run Cyberpunk 2077, but take a look at the settings. I am going to be running this at Ray Tracing Ultra, which is known to absolutely cripple GPUs. Even the 4090 struggles with it sometimes. Of course, we're going to leave AMD Fidelity Super Resolution 2.1 on, but we're going to put it on balanced. If it's off, it's just going to be really miserable. Trust me, we don't really want to play with that on. Let's see how it does with balanced, which is going to be the best combination of quality and sort of the frames per second settings. All right, in this scene here, we're getting around 36, 35 frames per second, which even though it's low, and you probably don't want to play it anywhere near this low, you definitely want to be above 60 frames per second, and you definitely want to be above 90 frames per second if you really want a good experience in this game. I think that with ray tracing on Ultra, pretty acceptable, and I mean, it looks pretty awesome. Doesn't look bad at all. Of course, this is the 7900 XTX, which is going to be considerably better than the 6900 XT, even with its ray tracing performance. I mean, you could play like this, but certainly is a little bit too low. And you can bet the 6900 XT is not going to do good in this test. Let's see how we can get it above 60 at least. I mean, obviously, let's see, if we put ray tracing on low and, well, let's see if we leave it on Ultra, but we leave FSR 2.1 on Auto. Maybe it's going to put us up to like a performance setting. Let's see how this one does. All right, so leaving that on Auto didn't make too much of a difference. I mean, we're getting a little bit more, but we're still in the low 40s. That's not going to do it. I think the ray tracing really has to go down. So ray tracing on low, FSR on Auto. Let's see if that'll do it. Okay, that definitely shot up the resolution a lot. Now we're getting around 80 frames per second. I mean, visually, you can tell it's maybe not as ray traced, if you will, like with the lighting, but it's really hard to tell unless you're really looking. If you're enjoying the game, I doubt you're going to tell the difference. So you really have to just put ray tracing on low or turn it off. Now, this is very playable frames per second. Sometimes it dips in the 60s, but we're still well above 60 frames per second. I'm actually kind of happy with this type of performance here on Auto. I mean, obviously, if we put it on balanced, it's going to be a little lower, and this is ray tracing on low. Yeah, you're still getting 60 frames per second, and the game still looks really good. I'm looking here on this 4K monitor. It looks fantastic, so I'm pretty happy with that. Obviously, if you turn ray tracing off, and you just put Ultra, and then you go maybe quality on FSR. If you go to Ultra without any FSR on, still getting a little under 60 frames per second, but it's playable. There's just no ray tracing. The game still looks really good. Hard to tell a difference unless you really peep in different, lighting areas and the shadows, but overall it looks pretty good. So you can turn FSR on, and that's going to be obviously a little bit better for you there as well. So now here we're starting off with the 6900 XT. Now remember, the 6900 XT has been having some driver issues. If you can hear the coil whine in the background, it's kind of just like the 7900 XTX, not much of a difference there. Of course, this is the other GPU, the newer XTX. Let's see how it does. This is going to be Ray Tracing Ultra. It's not too far off what the 7900 XTX was doing with these same settings. This one, you can at least move around. I mean, it's not completely off the wall. This is FSR 2.1. I'm not even going to try with FSR off because it's just going to absolutely destroy the GPU. Okay, with auto, I mean, you're getting in the 30s in the frame per second. That's certainly a little bit better. We're still pretty far away from 60 frames per second, but I'm kind of impressed with the 6900 XT with that last generation ray tracing performance of AMD. This is Ray Tracing Ultra, and this is really not that bad with FSR on auto. I mean, the game looks pretty good, so this really isn't all that terrible. This is actually very, very livable. If you want to play one of the hardest games in terms of ray tracing, this will definitely do it. Overall, though, very playable. As long as you use FSR, you can do some ray tracing and stay close to that 60 frames per second. Of course, turning ray tracing off, you're going to get the best performance by far. Alright guys, so we took a look at the 7900 XTX versus the 6900 XT. Obviously, when you turn on Ultra and like ray tracing, the XTX is going to do a lot better and it's going to be a lot more playable. But the 6900 XT, if you tweak a couple of settings and especially using FSR, it's actually pretty impressive what that GPU can still do even in these modern games. You can still have a very good playable experience, and you can save hundreds of dollars. It's not only the $999 MSRP of the particular XTX, that can be even higher since it's a new GPU. You have a better chance of finding a 6900 XT for like $600, for example, making that price delta even bigger and making this a pretty good deal. And remember, I'm playing here at 4K. If you drop this down to 1440p, 6900 XT is actually a perfect card for that resolution, and you're going to get really playable frames even using some ray tracing in certain games. Overall, pretty impressive for the 6900 XT. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.